So let me tell you a little story. I was sitting at my desk earlier this week. I was sitting in my office eating lunch and scrolling through the pages of Instagram, as I am known to do. I happened upon this page, or this post from Entertainment Weekly, talking about a particular reboot slash spin-off of a existing iconic source material. And you know, we live in an age where this kind of stuff is not uncommon. We live in the spin-off era of pop culture and television. So seeing updates and news outlets from time to time reporting that a television show or a movie is getting a reboot or a spin-off, not an uncommon occurrence. But for some reason, this particular one made me like snap inside. It felt like it was crossing a line. And I was just thinking to myself, you know what? No, this has gone too far. It was the straw that broke this camel's back. Now you might be wondering what in particular, which iconic source material. It was Twilight. Twilight is getting a television series reboot. I don't know why. I don't know why it was Twilight that did it for me. I don't know if it's just because I just got back from Japan a couple days ago and I'm incredibly tired and jet lagged. I don't know what it is, but I felt like I had to address this publicly because it seems like we have crossed a bit of a line and things have gotten out of hand in Hollywood. So after seeing this post, I just kind of went down a rabbit hole of looking at other additional spin-offs and reboots and rumored follow-up films or television installments of iconic source material that are rumored to be released in the near future. And I found an ungodly amount of TV shows, films that just, it would boggle the mind. It truly, like, I had to limit this list down considerably for the purposes of making this video. I decided it would be a good idea for us to just sit down together, you know, as a family. But I've compiled a list and we're going to go through them and make very unfair, very unfounded predictions and analysis and judgments about them, and just kind of talk about some of them and see if they're actually valid, potentially good content that we could be getting, or a cash grab, or maybe both. I'm also not going to be talking about the cinematic universes like Star Wars and Marvel, with one noteworthy exception, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. Those kind of cinematic universes have the perspective of wanting to tell a larger story intentionally rather than just taking random content and spinning it off for no reason. Spoiler alert! Spoiler! Spoiler! For literally all of the content that I'm going to be talking about, and without further ado, let's get started. I have my iPad here. I have all my research and notes and things like that and links to different articles here. So if you see me looking down and breaking eye contact, because I'm a researched ass bitch on this channel and I give you guys nothing but the best content, this list that I've created pertains mostly to content that I have either seen in its entirety, seen a decent portion of, or at least know enough about it to feel comfortable speaking on it. There is a lot more rumored spin-offs and reboots and things like that that I did not include on this list. I didn't even really get into movies that much on this list. This is just mostly television shows. So just to give you an idea, if you think this video is long and if you think I went overboard with the amount of things that I included in my notes here, just think of this and like multiply it by 10, because that's really what we're dealing with here in this era of current television and film and pop culture. I think it's appropriate to start with the series Frasier, which is something that I have talked about on my channel in the past as a golden standard for not only a successful sitcom series, but a successful spin-off sitcom series. There's a lot of alliteration. Sitcom spin-off, successful sitcom spin-off series. Successful sitcom spin-off series. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Anyway. It's an interesting case, not only in the fact that it's a spin-off series already, but also the fact that the character Frasier, the titular character, has been on television for I think 20 years. Played Frasier for 8 of the 11 seasons in the original show Cheers, and then he ran with Frasier for another 11 seasons, and I think he appeared in other shows too. I think he was in Wings. Was he in? I think he was. Anyways, you know what? It literally does not matter. The show essentially follows the story of Frasier Crane after he leaves his life in Boston to come back to Seattle to start a radio show psychologist series and navigate through the life with his father who lives with him in his apartment, his brother Niles, and his father's live-in nurse Daphne. Frasier made a very conscious effort to, on the one hand, pay homage and respect the continuity and the integrity of Frasier as a character from Cheers, but also not relying on Cheers as a crutch to implement certain things in the show Frasier. Frasier sets an entirely entirely different city. We have a different career for Frasier, an entirely different cast, a different comedic tone even, a lot of different settings. The show just feels different inherently from the show Cheers, and there's not a lot of references other than the character Frasier himself to the original source material. And it's kind of a daunting thing to do, but in a lot of ways it paid off because it really had to put in the work of not taking for granted that you see things that you know and that you like. Because I mean, Frasier was a character in Cheers, but he also wasn't like a super popular and well-liked character in the show Cheers. I remember hearing that there was like rumors about Frasier getting his own spin-off again a couple years ago, and I remember my first reaction was like, nah, maybe not, because we've already seen, like I said, 19 to 20 years of Frasier on television, so it's not like I'm dying to have more content with Kelsey Grammer on my screen. But nevertheless, this series was picked up by CBS. Apparently it's going to be written by the guys that wrote How I Met Your Mother, not to be confused with How I Met Your Father, because that would make me feel very, very differently about this upcoming series if that were the case. So it's obviously going to have Kelsey Grammer returning as Frasier, but none of the other original cast members from the series Frasier are going to be returning in any guest or reoccurring capacity. We do know that actually Lilith is going to be returning. We also are going to have somebody who's playing the adult version of Frasier's son Frederick. But interestingly too, they're going to have a person playing Daphne and Niles' child David. And there's going to be other people such as somebody who Frasier went to college with, who's a professor at some sort of psychology department at a university. And also know that it's going to be taking place in Boston. I couldn't lock down for sure what the premise of Frasier was going to be about. My prediction was that he was going to make a podcast with Frederick and they were going to butt heads and kind of repeat that Frasier-Martin dynamic now with like another generation. Seems like maybe there's some sort of psychology department at a university involved here, so it's possible maybe Frasier is going to be a professor, which I think would be kind of fun and different for him. Generally, my thoughts are this is not a necessary spinoff, right? None of this shit is necessary. Let me be clear on that. That being said, I am curious to see what they're going to do given the fact that none of the returning characters are going to be in this cast for this new upcoming spinoff. I don't think that's a point against this new spinoff series because, as I mentioned before, Frasier basically had to start from scratch creating this new cast and this new dynamic, and it did so very successfully, so it's not to say that they can't do that again. I could see it maybe running for a couple seasons, kind of like the Connors did, where it's like nice consistent series, but it's not something that's going to be getting like Emmy awards and things like that, you know what I mean? That took a very long time to explain, and there's a lot of ones on this list. This is going to be a long fucking video. Who's the Boss was a series that ran from 1984 to 1992, starring Tony Danza, Judith Light, Alyssa Milano, Katherine Helmond, and whoever the hell was that played Judith Light's son. I don't remember what the kid's name is. The series followed Tony Danza's character, who moves in as a live-in nanny with his daughter to Judith Light and her mother in her son's house. Hilarity and tension ensues. Classic 80s sitcom. I didn't actively watch the show. Obviously, it was on and concluded before I was even born, but I remember having like first or second season on DVD for some reason. It was a charming series. I liked it. It was fun. Tony Danza always kind of gives me vibes that he's like unhinged, but I did like the show. So this new series apparently has been picked up by a platform called Freevee, which I've literally never heard of before, but apparently a subsidiary of Amazon. Set to take place 30 years after the finale of Who's the Boss, Tony is going to be living with his single mother daughter, Alyssa Milano, as they attempt to navigate parenting and generational differences, and they're going to be living in the same house that they lived in from the original series. Technically, that wasn't his house, because it was Judith Light's house, because he was just living there as a nanny. And I know they got together, but maybe she died and they left it to her. My thoughts on this, it kind of feels like a very typical, very predictable formula that we've seen before. It kind of gives me Full House energy. I could see it maybe running for a season or two. The fact that it is on a platform that I have never heard of doesn't necessarily bode well, but it's also owned by Amazon, and they can just throw whatever amount of money possible at any project and it'll probably be fine. Futurama, I think, is one of the best shows ever. Futurama is interesting because it actually has been rebooted twice now due to the fact that certain networks dropped Futurama and then they were picked up by another network and then dropped again and then picked up again and then the show just concluded.
Good news, everyone! Those asinine morons who canceled us were themselves fired for incompetence.
It tells the story of Philip J. Fry, a pizza delivery driver in the year 1999 that accidentally gets frozen in a cryogenic tube for 1,000 years and wakes up in the year 2099 and must adapt to the future New York City with a new group of friends at Planet Express Delivery. What I love so much about Futurama is the fact that it is like so intelligently put together. This is one of those shows where you can go back and watch it and you will appreciate the show the more you go back and revisit it, because you will notice things that you might not have noticed upon first watch that will link things that are like seasons apart from one another in such a subtle and clever way. The humor is super sarcastic and dry and funny, but there's also these like emotional gut punches that will just like ruin your entire day, because the show is so good at layering in these very human, very real, very relatable emotions. If you have ever seen the episode Jurassic Bark of Futurama, you will know that this show is capable of taking your heart, throwing it on the ground, and stomping the fuck out of it. It like gets to the very core of human emotions, and I know that doesn't sound like a very funny show, but it combines it together in such a way that makes it just such a joy to watch. What we know about the show was that it was picked up by Hulu. It's allegedly going to be released this summer. Wait, really? Wow, okay. Guess it's going to be released this summer. I did not know that. The original cast and the original writers and creators of the show are all going to be returning. So, and they've ordered 20 episodes. Nick, if you're watching, fast forward like 90 seconds. So the finale has kind of like a time jump element to it where we're resetting the timeline and reverting back to a particular point in time, but we don't necessarily know what that point in time is going to be. And I guess I'm kind of curious and a little bit apprehensive of how far back we are going to be undoing the events of Futurama that we've seen thus far. They implied that it would possibly be prior to the events of like Fry and Leela becoming a couple, or even prior to the events of them meeting each other. You know, depending on how much they're going to walk back, it might just be starting over again. And I don't know if I would necessarily love that, because there's a lot of character development and character growth and investment that we've seen in this series already. If they walk it back a little, I'd be fine with it, but I also trust these writers. They have not steered me wrong in the past, so I'm wondering, I think they probably have a good plan. So am I excited about this show? Obviously I'm going to watch it. I'm excited, but I'm also a little bit like, so the show Monk stars Tony Shalhoub as Adrian Monk, a former police detective with a crippling case of obsessive-compulsive disorder, made worse by his wife's mysterious murder, who consults with the police department and uses his condition as a way to expertly solve crimes. The series was one of my favorite murder mystery shows. I always grew up loving murder mysteries. My mom basically like raised me on Columbo and Agatha Christie. I am really fucking good at the game Clue. Do not try me, because I will kick your ass. The finale of Monk was kind of frustrating, but also kind of beautiful. The overarching mystery throughout the series is who killed Adrian Monk's wife, Trudy, who's actually played by Jan from The Office, which is kind of hilarious because Trudy Monk is like this beautiful, wonderful, amazing human being, and Jan is like Jan from The Office. We find out in the finale who killed Trudy and why, but it's a person that wasn't introduced to us until the finale. Like literally the final episode is when we meet this person, and they've never been mentioned at any point in the series prior. I will say though, I can kind of forgive that, because the way that the show resolved a lot of the character arcs, resolved Adrian Monk's story, resolved a lot of the other character stories, was super touching and beautiful and satisfactory. And it was one of those where it's like, yes, I wish certain elements could have been better, but I'm fine with this. Now, talking about this movie, it's called Mr. Monk's Last Chance. It's going to be streamed on Peacock. So the description says, Mr. Monk tries to solve one last very personal case involving his beloved stepdaughter Molly, a journalist preparing for her wedding. So I don't know if that necessarily means that Monk has been retired, or he's going to retire, or he's just like, I'm never solving anything ever again for the rest of my life. Anyways, the returning cast is pretty much going to be everyone except Sharona, which I'm kind of bummed by, because I thought Sharona was a much better character than Natalie. No offense, I'm just saying. But everyone else is going to be back, including the person who plays Trudy Monk, which is kind of weird to me now that I think about it, because Trudy died prior to the events of the first season. But this is supposed to take place 13 years after the finale, so she's going to be 20 years older than when she died, and she's going to look considerably older from when she died. So on the one hand, kind of like Futurama, I'm a little peeved that they're coming back to something that was already wrapped up in a very satisfying way. The fact that it's just a movie and it's just this one isolated story makes me feel a little better. Like maybe they put more thought into this one particular story rather than trying to drag everything out for several episodes to come. It's going to be hard though to then have this like neat little bow of this finale, then untie it for this one story for 90 minutes, and then resolve it again in a way that makes you feel good about it. I do think that this is probably going to be a decent story. I don't think they would have gone to the effort of making this one single film if they had nothing for it, you know what I mean? Full disclosure, I don't watch LA Law. One of the only reasons why I picked this out of the very long list of shows that I found was because Corbin Burnson, aka Roger Dorn from Major League, and the absolutely insane person from The Celebrity Mole 3 is in this show, and I just wanted to kind of show a couple clips of him acting crazy.
So much bigger than everybody thinks.
I think it was also worth mentioning because I think it set the standard for law-related television, which is now one of the most oversaturated genres of television. So the spin-off series was supposed to be in talks with ABC, starring the main lawyer guy, Jonathan Rowlands, at the firm McKinsey Brackman, which I'm assuming is the same firm from the original series. Rowlands is no longer the idealistic attorney we remember, and is now conservative and clashing with the millennial co-workers when it comes to deciding the best path forward for the firm to effect political and legal change. Those millennial lawyers, you know what I mean? They're just the fucking worst. So according to my notes here, and according to the most recent articles I can find, this show was actually dropped by ABC and it's not going forward. It seems to be dead in the water as of 2022. I haven't heard any updates since then. And I think this is probably for the best, mainly because, like I said, there is a massive oversaturation with both legal practicing and law enforcement related television. I can respect the fact that this was maybe a show that like paved the way for all of those shows to come, but it also doesn't mean that we need to bring that back too. So I'm glad that this kind of died and we don't need to revisit it again. I actually had no idea that Barney was no longer airing. I feel like now that I think about it, in the very dark crevices of my mind, I might have known that Barney was canceled at some point. But the reboot is going to be made by Mattel. Looking at this picture of reboot Barney, and he looks a little scary, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It's going to be an animated series, which I kind of like the simplicity of the costume. I don't know if the animation will capture the same energy. It's set to release in 2024, and honestly, this is one of the ones that I'm not un-okay with. You know, I feel like there's something kind of meta and kind of fun for kids who watched Barney when they were younger and then now they're adults and they became parents and then their kids are watching the same thing. I feel like that's kind of like a nice little moment. So remember when I said that we weren't going to be talking about Marvel? This is the one exception. Allow me to discuss Daredevil Reborn. I think that's what it's called. Hold on. Daredevil Born Again, not Daredevil Reborn. Sorry, apparently my research sucks ass this video. So this series is technically part of the MCU canon, and it's interesting because it really doesn't have a lot of like the crossover and tie-ins, at least when it was airing to the rest of the MCU, but it does reference events that did occur in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For example, it talks about the attack on New York from the Avengers movie. It was a Netflix original series about Matt Murdock, a blind defense attorney by day, and by night a brutal vigilante who attempts to take down the criminal underworld of Hell's Kitchen by bashing people's heads in until their brains spill out. Yes, that is something that did happen in the first season. I like the fact that this series feels very different than the other MCU stuff. It feels a little bit darker. I like the fact that the character has this like Catholic guilt element to him. I think that's kind of a fun twist. I also like the fact that this character and this hero is not like the most indestructible person on planet Earth. I like the fact that Daredevil is like a guy who is blind but has heightened senses and is good at fighting, and you see him actually get injured and like suffer consequences of fighting somebody. I just like that the show has a very clear perspective and it just goes with it. I know that it was canceled after 3 seasons, or it wasn't picked up after 3 seasons, and a lot of the fans as well as the creators of the show were very surprised by this given the fact that it was popular. That's one of the reasons why I actually wanted to include it on this list, because it already has been running previously and this would technically be a reboot. Matt Murdock has made a couple appearances in the MCU umbrella films. He had a cameo appearance in Spider-Man No Way Home, and then he also appeared in She-Hulk. Then Daredevil's primary villain Kingpin appeared in Hawkeye. So the reboot. It is set to officially release under the MCU umbrella on Disney Plus in sometime in 2024. Most of the main cast is going to be returning except the guy who plays Foggy and then the person who plays Kingpin's wife. I like what I've seen of Daredevil so far. I think it's an interesting character. It's an interesting perspective. I've only seen the first season, but I've heard that it gets better as it goes. So I like what I see. I'd love to see more. However, Marvel, even before it started to annoy me, definitely has a distinctive tone with a lot of its movies that makes it feel a little bit more quippy and like glossy than what we see from Daredevil, or at least what we saw from the Daredevil on Netflix. And I'm hoping that Marvel doesn't like take those elements away from Daredevil and just makes it feel more one of the same things that we've seen a million times from the MCU. But other than that, I am curious to see what happens. I'm excited. I think whether it will be successful or not, it doesn't necessarily matter, because this is an installment in a very large plan that Marvel has for its story. So Lizzie McGuire stars Hilary Duff / Sophie Tompkins as Lizzie, a teenager attempting to navigate the ins and outs of middle school alongside the animated version of her inner thought process. It was never a show that I was like dying to watch, but it was a good show. You know, I think it was a very fun, relatable concept, and they did a good job with it. It ran for 3 seasons, and it had a very iconic movie. The reboot was supposed to star all the characters from the original series now as adults. Apparently, it was confirmed with Disney Plus in 2019, which is I think when Disney Plus was in its early stages, but then due to disagreements as to the creative direction of Lizzie as a character, Hilary Duff and Disney decided to part ways. So as of right now, there are no solid plans for Lizzie McGuire to be going forward. However, a recent interview a couple months ago, Hilary Duff made comments indicating that the talks have kind of softened between Disney Plus and Hilary Duff about the show. They're coming to more of an understanding, so it is possible that this show could be a thing in the future. So my thoughts on the matter. I'm not exactly sure who the subject matter of the show this would be for. I think it's really only geared towards people who liked the show as a kid and who are now interested in seeing what's going on as an adult, because it's not relatable anymore for kids, because the whole appeal and the whole genius of Lizzie McGuire was having this inner monologue of a teenager, marketing it towards like-minded and like-aged kids who can relate to what's going on. If we see Lizzie McGuire as an adult, these kids are not going to really give a shit about what she's thinking about or doing because it's not relatable to them. And if it's an adult, it might kind of tread the line of being a little bit too goofy, a little bit too juvenile and childlike. So I'm kind of wondering who exactly this show is supposed to be for. Moving right along to Zoe 101, which has been listed in these different spin-off and reboot articles as Zoe 102. And there's something about the 102, like the change to the 102, that just kind of like, I don't know why, it just like causes a reaction in me. Like you can just picture the writers sitting down in the room being like, okay, we want to do a spin-off to Zoe 101. How are we going to make people like realize that this is a spin-off? What can we do? Like what can we change about the title to like indicate that it is now not the first installment, but the second iteration? 102. Brilliant. This is not a show that I necessarily watched a ton of. I would say even less so than Lizzie McGuire. I rarely watched Zoe 101, but I'm down with the basic concept. Like I'm pretty familiar with what the basic gist of it was. Zoe and her friends navigate the misadventures of a California boarding school. I didn't necessarily resonate super much with this show growing up. It was not the most interesting show in the world to me, but I know a lot of people liked it. Ran for 3 seasons from 2005 to 2008. And then there was also like, I didn't know this, but apparently there was like a random off episode in 2015, kind of intended to be a backdoor pilot for a reboot or a spin-off of the series, but it never happened. So apparently the spin-off is supposed to be set in the present, and all of the friends from the original series are going to be returning to their alma mater for a wedding. Whose wedding? I'm not entirely sure. Why they're returning to the alma mater? I'm also not entirely sure. I'm just trying to picture like my friends from high school all collecting together after all this time to go to a wedding at the high school. Like why does the high school have to be involved? Is it a high school reunion? Is someone like happening to get married at some point, but they're going to a reunion? Do they just like get married at the high school? I don't understand. And it seems to be including most of the main cast. So my thoughts on this are kind of like, why? I don't really understand who asked for this. This show as it was, from what I remember, and if you're a huge fan of Zoe 101, please do not come for me in the comments. From what I remember, a lot of this show was kind of lackluster. If they did go through with this, it would be canceled after 1 season. I'm calling it right now, and if it isn't, then it should be. The original film, which was a 1980s classic rom-com, starred Alicia Silverstone as Cher Horowitz, the quintessential rich, spoiled 1980s teenager attempting to learn to not be a rich, spoiled teenager despite being a bit, dare I say, clueless. She also kisses her stepbrother, which, I mean, it is Paul Rudd, but it's also like, it's kind of gross. So when I saw that there was going to be a spin-off of this film, I was a little confused because I'm like, are they going to do basically like a retelling of it? Are they going to do a prequel story? This is how the show is described by apparently whatever pitch that they had with the networks about this show. Please listen carefully because I don't think I can actually read this more than once. Baby pink and bisexual, blue-tinted, tiny sunglasses wearing, oat milk latte and Adderall-fueled look at the lives of several California teens as they navigate the rise of a new leader, Dion, in the wake of the disappearance of their high school's former queen bee, Cher. Can you explain to me what I just read? Because I don't think I actually could. It says a lot, but it doesn't say anything at all. And I have so many questions. First of all, where is Cher? Is she dead? Is she missing? Has she been kidnapped? So is this like an alternate reality where Clueless turns into like a slasher murder mystery series? I mean, if you want to talk about making a twist on your murder mysteries, this is how you do it. There are reports from 2021 on the one hand that say that this is dead in the water and that other networks were not interested and dropped it. But I swear to God, I did read an article yesterday and I could not find the article for the life of me that was dated 4 days ago that said that it got picked up by a network and that it was going forward with this particular concept. There's also talks apparently from a couple months ago of Stacey Dash, Alicia Silverstone talking about possibly doing a different reboot in modern times. So maybe this actually isn't happening, but they're trying to get something off the ground. If they go with like the chair being missing true crime 1980s twist, I would love that, but I obviously don't think they're going to do that because I never get what I want. Do it, you coward. The series pitch, it's going to be apparently written from the writers of Family Guy. It would appear on Fox, and all of the cast would come back, but with a little bit of a twist to the concept of the series. Apparently, it's going to be animated entirely, which I kind of fucking love. And this is what I'm talking about when I say when you make a show and you're going to do a reboot or a spinoff, you have to at least come to the table with something different. And I think making it this twist on this animated series, I think you could do even more ridiculous and absurd and campy things with this story if it were animated. This is like my dad's favorite movie of all time. So if I don't talk about this in a sufficient way, I'm probably going to get disowned. So okay, here we go. Premise of the movie essentially centers around a struggling Iowa farmer hearing mysterious voices instructing him to turn his corn farm into a baseball field, which in turn summons many of the classic baseball heroes from the 1920s to come play in his backyard. If you've ever played baseball, if you've ever watched the sport of baseball or bonded over the sport of baseball or loved the sport of baseball, this is a movie that you just have to watch. It's just such a wonderful and touching movie and really speaks to the heart of why people love sports, why people bond over sports. Apparently, this was supposed to be a reimagination of the story set in a television series format. It was supposed to be picked up by Peacock with an entirely new cast, and it was basically, the idea was in response to the surge in popularity of the film because the Field of Dreams baseball field was the location of a game between the Yankees and the White Sox a few years back, and as a result, people kind of got into the movie again. But then in 2021, the idea was abruptly dropped. So right now, this is not an idea that is currently being pursued, but I just had to include it on this list because what the fuck? Like, why this movie? I understand you want to make money from people. Like, there is nothing about this movie that needs to be further explored. It was perfectly captured in the course of this film, you know? It's like, what are you going to make different episodes about? Like, the Kevin Costner character goes to the store and is like, okay, what dirt should I pick out for the field? What chalk should I line down on the field? Like, there's nothing more that you can, like, expand upon from this movie. I don't know. I don't understand. So let's now talk about the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender series. Yep, I just will say that Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of, I think, the best children's television shows of all time. The show has an amazing way of introducing and exploring very sophisticated topics and themes in this show, but also not presenting it in a way that is like dumbing it down or speaking down to children like they're stupid, but also presenting it in a way that makes sense and that is accessible to both children and adults. The show is also just genuinely very creative and funny. It's one of those shows that I genuinely wish went on for longer than 4 seasons. I will also have to say that Iroh is probably my favorite character in all of television. He is by far one of the characters that makes me feel proud to be an INFP. So I'm just going to leave it at that. An amazing show. But now we also have to talk about the other iteration of Avatar, which is the Avatar live action movie from 2010. For how amazing and beautiful Avatar: The Last Airbender as a series was, this movie was literally the exact opposite. It was a freaking dumpster fire. You can't focus on anything that's going on because everything looks really fucking weird and really bad. Fundamental things about the story wrong, including how the firebenders use their powers. It was baffling how bad this movie was. Acting was terrible. They pronounced people's names wrong in a way where it's like, why are you pronouncing someone's name like that when you know that's not how it's pronounced? You know, it's an interesting decision to take this very beloved source material that is almost perfect, knowing that it has one of the worst live action adaptations that has ever existed on planet Earth, and is like, you know what? let's make another one. According to the internet, the new series is going to be produced by Netflix. It's going to be an 8 to 10 1-hour long episodes. It's going to be using groundbreaking LED technology to film it. I think it's important to note too that the original creators of the series are not involved in any capacity, which is a super good sign. And it will retread the same plot as the animated series. So let's talk about it then. The show is basically not going to be giving us anything new. It's going to be just going through the events as we know them from a series that is already beloved and like near perfect and something that people have been very protective of in the past. And we're going to take the format and the medium that has created one of the most scrutinized films of all time, and we're going to like use that medium to retell the same story without adding anything new to it. Why? Why are we doing this? Netflix will literally make any fucking product if they think it'll make a little bit of money. I think this is going to be a giant flop, and I think Netflix is going to be very confused as to why. Speaking of terrible ideas for adaptations of iconic source material on Netflix, let's talk about One Piece. So One Piece is one of the most iconic and long-running animes and manga series of all time. I think right now we have like 1,100 episodes or something crazy like that. I've only seen about 30 episodes of the series, but I've heard nothing but amazing things about it. My one friend binged like 900 something episodes in like 7 or 8 weeks from the series and has been bothering me nonstop to watch it. So the story essentially tells the story of Monkey D. Luffy? I'm really sorry, Ben, please don't yell at me. So Luffy and his band of pirates known as the Straw Hats, searching around the globe for the infamous and elusive treasure known as the One Piece. I think it was a couple months ago it came to my attention that Netflix is now also making a live-action version of One Piece, which is set to release at some point later this year. And it's supposed to be a live-action series that is going to be covering the events of the first 50 episodes of the anime. And according to my friend Ben, that's really like the first significant arc of the series, and by the end of the 50th episode, that's when really you get hooked into One Piece and you really start to become invested in the story. There has been a little bit of interesting news surrounding this live adaptation as of the last couple weeks. Apparently there was some unverified source that reported that apparently there were some initial screenings of the first couple episodes of this live action adaptation, saying that people were appalled by the terrible CGI and that the tonal differences in the pacing was very jarring and completely incoherent, and that a lot of the people, if you haven't seen One Piece, the story doesn't make any sense and you can't really understand what's going on if you don't already know what's happening from the manga or the anime. A lot of the people associated with the show are now claiming that it's a bogus report and that didn't actually happen. So there's a lot of confusion as to what's going on. Given the fact that there's not a lot of marketing or advertising efforts for this show as of right now, it's really hard to discern whether those reports are true or not. But, I have my own opinions on that. Do I think this show is going to be good? No. I haven't seen all of One Piece. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I just, knowing Netflix's record and knowing the fact that they're also making a live action Avatar, in both cases you have this beloved source material and you're making a worser version of it. I think One Piece's animation and just the style of the show, it lends itself way better to be animated. I do not see a reality where some of the things that they do in the show could possibly look good for live adaptation. This is my cat, for those of you who haven't seen her. This is Lulu. Come on, Lou. Put on the charm, huh? Apparently there have been reports that an adult adaptation of this series is set to be released on Fox and will kind of be a more raunchy adult version of the childhood classic. There's going to be a time jump in the series where Fred Flintstone is now on the brink of retirement and Pebbles, his daughter, is now in her 20s navigating her new career. This kind of sounds like Who's the Boss, actually, so maybe there's a bit of a redundancy in this list here. I like the fact that there's a different comedic tone and a different perspective to this. I think it's a little bit interesting that they have the time jump, but I also don't really necessarily remember the Flintstones being super grounded in a particular stringent plot. So it's weird that there is a more structured plot or more structured perspective for it. But I guess that's, again, taking it in a different direction, which is kind of cool. I literally don't think I need to explain what Harry Potter is to anybody. If you've been living under a rock, you probably still know what Harry Potter is. Probably one of the most iconic book series and film series of all time. It was created by J.K. Rowling, who as of recently has fallen under fire in the public eye as of late for her very problematic and hurtful comments about the trans community. Full disclosure, because I feel like this is important to some people for some reason, I did not read the books. I haven't gotten a chance to read the books yet, but I have seen the movies. I love the movies. I have an appreciation for the fact that there are differences between the books and movies. movies. My roommate from college constantly hammers that into my head every time we talk about Harry Potter. I just like the movies for what they are. They might be different from the books. They might be worse than the books. I have no idea, but I just like them. I think they're entertaining and fun. So apparently HBO has recently announced that they're going to have a 10-year series with a new cast recounting the events of the books from the Harry Potter series. It's set to release in 2025 or 2026, and one of the executive producers on this project is J.K. Rowling. I always wondered one day if this would ever happen, if you had like the ultra mega iconic content like Star Wars or Harry Potter and you just remake them. I mean, they've had a lot of spin-offs and prequels and like side stories and things like that, but you just flat out recast, remake them. I feel like this is just not necessary. It also seems incredibly arrogant that they made it a 10-year deal. Like they know that people are going to love this and that they're just going to be able to continue from beginning to end. There hasn't been any casting announcements. Not only were the main three kids in Harry Potter very well done and very well performed, but all of the supporting characters that we see throughout these 8 movies have been played a lot of the times by like massive heavy hitters of actors, and they're just a lot of their performances and the likability of these movies are because of those performances, and they are not coming back. So it's kind of a risk, in my opinion, to start from scratch and expect to have that same magic and that same effectiveness in performance. I don't think necessarily anybody asked for this either. It's not like people were clamoring for a television show. I feel like the Harry Potter fans are kind of like Star Wars fans, where they're incredibly judgmental and protective of their source material. I don't think people are going to be super kind to any errors or like very graceful about any errors. I do think there are a lot of people that say, yeah, there's stuff wasn't in the movies that was in the books and we wish it was in the movies, but those people probably also would just read the books if they wanted to like revisit those details. I don't necessarily think that they're like, we need to have it in a television show, we need to be able to physically see it to appreciate it. Do I think it'll make it through the end of the 10 seasons? I don't know. That's a very long fucking time. I mean, I've only lived in this apartment for 5 years and that feels like an eternity, and that's like half the time. All right, now time for the last one on the list, which is good because this is almost empty and I really have to pee. Again, this is kind of a series that I don't think necessarily needs any explanation, but I will do so anyways. So the series is an extremely popular teenage book series and later film franchise about a toxic relationship between a teenage girl and a vampire in the town of Forks, Washington. Twilight became popular around the time I was in middle school, and I didn't read the books growing up, but I just remember seeing them fucking everywhere. It was one of those phenomenons. People acted very, very strangely in their, Team Edward versus Team Jacob feuds. People would become think they were vampires. Like it just kind of had this pop culture stranglehold on tweens and teenagers and some very questionable middle-aged white women. So I ended up watching the movies in college just because I had never seen them before, and I watched them with my roommate, and now they're kind of like my favorite movies of all time because I genuinely think they're hilarious. Every single production, editing, cinematography, directing, acting choice that is made throughout the course of these 5 movies that is just so bafflingly strange and weird and over the top that it's just, you can't help but laugh. It's not because of the story. If you take all of those elements away, the story itself is incredibly problematic, is incredibly toxic. It is not a good message to be projecting to children and teenagers. But I can't help but laugh at how seriously this story takes itself in these films and how relentlessly silly it all feels. So it was announced a couple days ago that Twilight was going to be getting its own television series recounting the events from the books and the movies. It's going to be an entirely new cast of characters, so none of the returning characters are going to be coming back, which makes sense because they're all really old and probably tired of being associated with Twilight. And apparently everyone is super fucking mad about this. Even Twilight fans who unironically like Twilight were like, please don't give us this, we don't want this is going to be bad. And I would have to agree. This is probably one of the most unnecessary, ridiculous, nobody asked for this, what the fuck are you doing kind of reboots that I have seen out of this entire list. I think Field of Dreams is close to being up there, but Twilight really does seem to take the cake in my mind for being just what are we thinking? The movie, the story, like I said, is incredibly problematic. It's incredibly toxic. The story has been panned over the years for the message, the problematic message that it sends to its young, impressionable audience about toxic relationships, manipulation, being controlled by your partner and romanticizing that aspect of it. So inherently, I don't know why a studio would want to invest in this story when it's probably going to get heavily, heavily criticized for how it's depicting something where inherently the story is just problematic from beginning to end. So there's nothing you can do to take out those problematic aspects and pretend like it doesn't exist. The entire fucking thing is just not super great for kids. Aside from being toxic, there's remarkably few interesting things that happen in the Twilight series. If you take away the weird, wacky post-production elements of them, they're really fucking boring. So elongating that story into a television series is Why? Even if the decision basically boiled down to, this used to be a popular franchise, I want to make a lot of money, let's regurgitate this large franchise that was very lucrative in the past and just stretch it out further. Even if that was the decision, clearly it's not working very well, because a ton of fans who legitimately like the Twilight franchise have come out and said, literally no one asked for this, please do not do this. So I'm at a loss. Hey guys, it's editing again. When I was reviewing the footage, I filmed this video like a week and a half ago and I've been working on editing it ever since. I already, like I mentioned before, I had to cut a lot of the reboots and spin-offs that I found in my initial bout of research because it was stuff that I didn't really know that much about or feel comfortable talking about. Hello. I'm trying to do something here. Throughout the process of editing this video, I had to cut a lot of the ones that I originally filmed because there just wasn't a lot of time, and this video was going to be like an hour and a half legitimately if I didn't cut certain things. So there was already a lot of stuff that I wasn't talking about in this video that I wanted to include but couldn't. And then throughout the process, I'm literally trying to do something. And then throughout the process of filming and editing, I noticed just in updates that I found online that there was so many more announced projects for reboots, spin-offs, sequels, prequels, whatever you want to call it. It just got to a point where I was like, okay, if I go back and include all of this information, this video would be like 3 hours. So what I think I'm going to do, just for the purposes of not making this video too long and just for the purposes of also wanting to cover all of my bases, because this is stuff that I do want to talk about. They're not just like random little projects. They're announcements that were like, I have a lot of opinions on. So what I think what's going to happen is I am going to make this a reoccurring series on my channel, break this stuff up into more than one video, so that when I compile a good enough list of additional things to talk about, or I just have a period of time where there's nothing that I want to cover, like trailers or video analysis or whatever, I can talk about these upcoming projects of sequels and spin-offs and things like that, and kind of do the same thing that I did on this video. It's not going to be like every week, it's not going to be everything that I make videos about on my channel, but it is something, sorry, my cat's just like demanding attention, but it's something that I think would be fun to revisit. Because I think this is a thing that, as we've seen, we're in the sequel era of Hollywood film and television, and this is something that we have become accustomed to. So there's always going to be new announcements of things. So if there are things that I did not get a chance to talk about, or things that I did not address in this video at all that you want to hear me talk about or hear my thoughts and opinions on, different projects that have been announced as being rebooted or getting a follow-up or whatever, please let me know in the comments. It's possible it maybe made the list but got cut in editing and I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but in case it's not on my radar, please make sure to let me know in the comments what you guys want to see. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if there's other movies and TV shows that I didn't get to talk about in this video that are getting spin-offs or reboots, and let me know if you want to see those in another video. I'm gonna go pay attention to my cat because otherwise she's going to murder me in my sleep. So, okay, bye.